A recent report says the Phillies and Kyle Schwarber are not close on a free agent deal. But I'll tell you why Phillies fans shouldn't be remotely worried yet in today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and also now the number one sports podcast network. Locked On Phillies is your number one place for daily, Monday through Friday, Philadelphia Phillies content. You might know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air over 97.5 The Fanatic, doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for over 6 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for the past 4 seasons, and this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. We got a recent report from Todd Zolecki, who covers the Phillies for MLB.com, saying that Kyle Schwarber and the Phillies are not close on a deal. And some people got a little bit nervous when this was reported. I'll tell you why there's nothing to worry about, at least not yet. We're going to start off with that. But later on in the episode, we're going to talk about what it would cost the Phillies to potentially trade for Ketel Marte, who we talked about in yesterday's episode, being a 50-50 shot to be traded according to John Morosi. And the Phillies were one of the teams listed as in on him that have expressed interest. What would that look like? And where should the line be drawn? And we're going to wrap up with a remembrance of a great Philly, I guess we'll call him role player, vibes guy, the maybe original vibes guy for this Phillies era. Brad Miller retired. We're going to talk about Bamboo Brad later on. But let's start with the big stuff, because Kyle Schwarber and the Phillies are apparently not close on a contract that would bring him back to Philadelphia. This report via Todd Zolecki, who does a great job covering the Phillies for MLB.com. Now, the report states that the Phillies are apart on years and money from Kyle Schwarber. Now, if you're keeping score at home, years and money are the only thing that really matters outside of location. We already know Philly has already placed Kyle Schwarber's comfortable because he's played the last 4 years here. So, what does this mean for where the free agent courtship of Kyle Schwarber is for the Phillies? To me, I'm not remotely worried about this. This is just an update of exactly what you should expect to be the case at this point. If it was going to be easy to get a deal done with Kyle Schwarber, like, hey, shake hands 2 days into free agency, you're coming back, they would have had a deal done before this season. Kyle Schwarber bet on himself by not taking the Phillies contract offer ahead of this year. And he hit the jackpot. He went out and became the runner-up for NL MVP and had the best offensive season of his career by a wide margin. And you know what you do when you hit the jackpot? You go ahead and cash in on everything you earned. And Kyle Schwarber is going to cash in not a cent less than what he believes unless the market forces him to. And that's his right. It would be crazy for him to agree to a deal this early in free agency. You can't just think about this from a Phillies fan perspective. He loves it here. We love having him here. We want him back. We're willing to pay him. Why is he not signed yet? That's the simple way of thinking about it. The realistic way of thinking about it is, I'm going to check everywhere in this market to try and get the best deal possible. Now, the hope is that if a team goes out and says, hey, we're going to give you X amount of years for X dollar amount, and that's higher than what the Phillies have offered him, that he would then come back to Dave Dombrowski and John Middleton and say, hey, here's what whatever team is offering me. Can you match it? Can you beat it? I want to be in Philadelphia, but this is what the market price is. Know your worth, right? We say that all the time about ourselves. Why would Kyle Schwarber not feel the same way, especially when his worth is well over $100 million on this next contract? That's a heck of a lot of worth, and I wouldn't want to forfeit any of that if I was him, so I can't blame him. But here's why this isn't the problem. Because Philadelphia is still, according to pretty much every expert covering baseball today, the number one likely destination for Kyle Schwarber to go back to. Now, the longer it takes, the more expensive it could get to bring him back. That's a valid concern of Phillies fans, and we've addressed that throughout the offseason so far, but I'll address it again now. I don't know how you replicate Kyle Schwarber without just re-signing him exactly. There could be some interesting options if you let him walk and you approached a guy like Cody Bellinger, Kyle Tucker, Pete Alonso, but I'd feel much more comfortable with the guy that I know works in this city, on this team, in this clubhouse, and that's Kyle Schwarber. He's had his best offensive seasons of his career here in Philadelphia. So clearly it's a place he feels comfortable, and it's a place where the fan base is largely in favor of him. Remember, throughout this offseason, we've done some polls and some mailbag Mondays where people just constantly ask about Kyle Schwarber. People always vote him as the most, like the highest focus free agent for them to bring back, like what you'd want to do. Even when we put a poll out about alternative options for Kyle Schwarber, no one picked, well, not no one picked, but the majority picked Kyle Schwarber over the alternative option. So everything is pointing towards him still coming back. But to think that he's going to sign before Thanksgiving is just, it's not realistic for the market that he's going to command. It's going to take time. And these offers don't just come in. You don't just call I don't know, let's throw the Mets, because the Mets have been a team that have been rumored as interested in Kyle Schwarber. You don't just call the Mets and say, give me your best offer, and then they text you back in 5 minutes, 150 over 4 years, and you say, cool, done deal. Like, it takes time for them to build out what they want to do with their offseason and reach back out to Kyle Schwarber and work out the wording in a potential contract and then draw deals up and everything like that. It's not an easy process. It's not a day-to-day process, and these teams are not communicating with the agent daily. It might be weekly. It might be every other week. Heck, it might be monthly if they want to give the space to Kyle Schwarber to make his decision. So it's going to be a slow, plodding process. Major League Baseball's offseason moves like a glacier, just a little inch at a time. And eventually, a piece of that glacier is going to break off. And that could be the winter meetings. Normally, it is the winter meetings. December 7th to 10th, we're coming up on it. So that's a point where you see a lot of movement in a short period of time, or the push of more movement. So could we get the notification after the winter meetings, Kyle Schwarber back to Philly? Sure. But I will bet you right now a heck of a lot of money that Kyle Schwarber is not signing anywhere, even in Philadelphia, until at least after the winter meetings. So anything you see as far as, well, the Phils and Schwarber are not close on deals or years, don't read too much into that and think, well, Schwarber must be mad at the organization or the Phillies must be lowballing him. I don't think the Phillies are lowballing him. I think the Phillies are giving him a realistic offer based on age, based on the fact that he's just a DH and doesn't play a position. And Kyle Schwarber saying, hey, I'm going to see what else is out there. And if they are far apart, here's one thing that I also feel very confident in saying. Any offer that Kyle Schwarber gets outside of the astronomical and unrealistic will be matched by the Philadelphia Phillies and John Middleton. If you're John Middleton, how in the world do you let that guy walk out the door? After the season he just gave you, after what he means to his fan base and community, after what he means to his clubhouse and this team as far as a leader, you can't afford to let him go, at least from the perspective of the owner. You could argue that Kyle Schwarber right now for this team, with Bryce Harper on it, with Trey Turner on it, with Zach Wheeler on it, with Christopher Sanchez on it, you could argue Schwarber is your most valuable potential asset. Now, I don't know if it plays out that way, but that's what he certainly looks like right now. And for that reason, there will be a concerted effort to re-sign him. And I wouldn't look too much into, I should say, the report that they're not close on years or money. In fact, if you're someone who is a little nervous about the Phillies handing out another long-term contract to an aging star player, and I know a lot of you out there are, this should be good news for you, because it means that the Phillies are not outselling themselves. right? They're not bidding up the price on their own. Make your offer. Let him know he can come back with something that matches, but you don't want to artificially inflate the price on Kyle Schwarber yourself. So you give what you're willing to give, and then if the market pushes up, you go up. But you might have to play a little bit of hardball. And if anyone thinks, oh, well, you shouldn't play hardball with Kyle Schwarber, what if he gets annoyed with the organization? That's the price of doing business in Major League Baseball, professional sports in general. These guys know the name of the game. It's no hard feelings out here unless you give a disgustingly low offer, which the Phillies are not going to do. So he's going to negotiate on his behalf, and the Phillies need to counter to try and get something done in their best interest. It's not just succumb to the whim of Kyle Schwarber because we love him. We want to see more Schwarbombs at Citizens Bank Park. It's here's what we think you're worth. Let's let the market develop. That's all this news is to me. So if you're a Phillies fan who's worried, don't be. Don't let it stress you out over the Thanksgiving holiday. It's still way more likely than not that number 12 is back here in Philadelphia. But what would get another all-star caliber player to Philadelphia? Ketel Marte. We'll remind you of the news on him and the trade situation that could be unfolding with the Arizona Diamondbacks. But what would it cost? I heard something interesting today from a very well-placed source in Major League Baseball. But would the Phillies be smart to give up what the Diamondbacks could be asking for? We'll talk about it as we continue today's episode. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because the NBA is rolling and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. A great example of why live bets can be so lucrative. Last night, the Sixers started their game against the Magic as a 4.5-point dog, which means all they were expected to do was lose by 5, right? 4 or 5 points. They ended up losing 144 to 103. That is a 41-point loss. They almost 10 times the expected spread and started to watch the game. You could see things were not going the Sixers' way. That's why FanDuel's so great, because you can jump in on the action the second you realize, ooh, this game's not going as planned. You can make some money out of it, even if your team doesn't win. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's talk Ketel Marte trade price. Just a reset of what we talked about in case you missed yesterday's episode. And if you did, you know what you got to do. You got to be part of our Everydayers Club. Checking out Locked On Phillies Monday through Friday, daily content. You can watch the show on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, I would love if you hit the subscribe button. It's free and easy to subscribe. All that's going to do is get you notifications when new episodes are posted. When you open your YouTube app, Locked On Phillies will show up in your algorithm. And that way you can find our content easier. So it's super easy to do. It really helps you out. It really helps us out. But if you're not watching on YouTube, or maybe you normally do and you just want to listen, we're also available wherever you get your podcasts in just audio form. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please make sure you're rating and reviewing. I appreciate everybody who checks out Locked On Phillies, everyone who rates, reviews, subscribes, all of that great stuff that helps us out, because it helps me get more content out to you. So thank you to everyone who's done that. If you're missing episodes, be part of our Everydayer Club. It's a great place to be. But in case you missed yesterday's episode, because I can't expect everybody to see everything, Ketel Marte, 3-time All-Star second baseman of the Arizona Diamondbacks, been an All-Star each of the last 2 seasons. It was reported that Arizona is listening to offers on Marte. Actively listening. Marte has a no-trade clause, and the Phillies are not one of the teams on his list where he says, don't send me there. So the Phillies are in play. Furthermore, John Morosi of MLB.com is saying, or he might just be MLB Network. John Morosi, though, great baseball insider, has a lot of good information, says the Phillies are one of the main teams leading the charge. So we talked all about how that could transform the Phillies lineup yesterday. But a player like Marte is going to come at a price. And I heard some whispers today that the player that the Marte deal would have to be built around could be Aidan Miller. Now, this is where it gets tricky because Marte's 32. While he could transform the Phillies for this year and next year, if we have baseball with the 2027 work stoppage looming, but for the next couple seasons while he's in his prime, but he doesn't really extend the Phillies window. He more powers them up for where they're at right now. Aidan Miller is one of that three-headed prospect monster group that does extend the Phillies window. Miller, Crawford, Painter. You hear me talk about them all the time. A guy in the outfield, a guy in the infield, a pitcher. That's great, right? That's the next generation of Phillies stars if they work out at the major league level the way that their prospect rankings would suggest that they would. So you'd like to hang on to those guys. Is it realistic for the Phillies to give up Aidan Miller or another top prospect in a trade for Ketel Marte? Right now, I'm going to tell you this. And as much as I would love Ketel Marte on the team, I stood fast on this at the trade deadline. I stood fast on this last offseason. I will stand fast on this offseason. Painter does not move. Crawford does not move. Aidan Miller does not move. Those three prospects to me are untradeable because without them, the Phillies are up blank creek without a paddle once this current group of stars starts to decline, or if you believe that the Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber, JT Realmuto, Nick Castellanos grouping has already begun that slide in the back half of their career, well, then you definitely don't want to give up those top prospects, right? You want those guys available to create the next generation of Phillies baseball and to be cornerstones of the franchise for years going forward, past just 26, 27, 28. So I would personally tell the Phillies, do not move Aidan Miller. Now, do I think that's the only way this deal gets done? I don't. If you're listening actively to trade requests for a back-to-back all-star second baseman who has been incredibly productive, he's been generally in MVP conversations at points in the past couple of seasons. He is a really, really good player. He has injury issues, but there's a reason why Arizona's listening. Clearly, they don't think something is working out there with Marte, or they're looking at a rebuild. And because of that, he might not be burning a hole in their pocket, as the expression goes. When you got money, you got to spend. You got to get rid of something. But they're not uncomfortable with moving him. And while you look around baseball and you say, okay, there could be some other teams that need a second baseman. How many teams need a second baseman that is willing to take on that size of contract, which would pull out some of the smaller market teams, which is also in a contention window right now, because you're not trying to rebuild with a 32-year-old on 5 years remaining on his deal. You're trying to add that player to a win-now team. The other name that John Morosi listed was the Toronto Blue Jays. We'll see what they've got going on, but they could look at re-signing Bo Bichette. Like, they've got to figure some stuff out of their own as far as things are concerned. So I don't think the Phillies need to be raked over the coals by the Arizona Diamondbacks. If they want Miller, you counter. And if they say, well, you have to do Miller, then for me, you're not getting Ketel Marte. You can tell me in the comments on YouTube if I'm crazy for drawing a line in the sand at Aidan Miller. But I can't have this team get completely barren of talent in the minor leagues. Like that's an unacceptable result. And for everyone who's mad at Dave Dombrowski and the way he's handled things over the past couple of years here in Philadelphia, not getting enough done at the major league level with free agency acquisitions, I'd like there to be some type of respect for the future from Dave Dombrowski. And he's done a pretty good job of that here in Philadelphia, which has not normally been the way he handles his business as a head of a front office. Normally he's Davy championships. Trade all the prospects. Let's try and win now. And then we leave the organization and you rebuild, because I'm not rebuilding. He's been pretty good. He's had a pretty good balance here in Philly. The only big prospects that he's really moved have been Logan O'Hoppe, who was blocked, Eduardo Tait, who was 19, and Mick Abel, who you moved for an all MLB closer in a season where you thought you had a really good chance. I don't mind any of those guys that he's moved. Well, the O'Hoppe thing is weird now looking back with how things have gone, and JT now hitting free agency. But at the same time, right, I would like to see those three guys stay. So if the deal for Marte includes any of Crawford, Painter, or Miller, I'm telling them no thanks. I'm trying to get it done another way. And if that's the case, well, you just got to cross your fingers and hope that other teams are not willing to part with a prospect of Aidan Miller's caliber. And then you go back to fit and then you work some deal out. But we will see. Maybe I'm crazy for saying that. Maybe you'd rather bring in a guy to help the Phillies win now. But I think the fan base leans more towards trying to keep a little bit of an extended window with some of these younger players that could be coming up in the next year or so. Maybe, you know what? That would be a good off-the-poll question for Friday's episode. So keep that in mind. I'm going to ask about whether or not you would give up Aidan Miller for Ketel Marte as part of the deal, the cornerstone of that deal. You could also have to move Bryson Stott. You're going to have to move other players potentially. But I'll ask that later on to you in a poll question on X for Friday's episode. Coming up next, we're going to show some love to a Phillies legend. Well, that might be overstating it a little bit. But Bamboo Brad Miller was a big part of something very important that I think the Phillies might not have enough of right now. We're going to talk about his retirement announcement and why what he meant to the Phillies could be something important for them to look for again this offseason. Yep, pour one out for Bamboo Brad. He announced his retirement yesterday. Played 206 games over parts of 2 seasons for the Phillies. Hit 32 home runs for the Phils. Had 70 RBIs. He wasn't anything crazy special, right? I already saw, if you follow on socials, a great account called the Hall of Pretty Good, I think it is. Yeah, Hall of Very Good. I forget exactly what it's called, and that's a shame on me. But if you know what I'm talking about, it's just like these fun players where when you're sitting around with your buddies one day, cracking a couple beers, and you say, "Hey, you remember Brad Miller?" Everyone's like, that's a good one. I forgot about Brad Miller. It's just like you had some good moments, had an okay career. People will remember you every once in a while, and just passing when you have that thought. That's the Brad Miller zone. So why in the world, years after he played in Philadelphia, am I talking about a role player and his retirement? Well, one, show some respect to Bamboo Brad. That dude was a solid major league player. But two, it's the nickname. And I'm not saying, the Phillies need more nicknames. If you're not familiar with why he's called Bamboo Brad Miller, when the Phillies were in a bad slump a couple years back with Brad Miller on the team, he brought in a bamboo plant to the locker room. And that ended up being like the lucky charm of the Phillies. They went on a run. They credited the bamboo plant. Bamboo Brad was born. And it was just a fun thing in a season that didn't really end anywhere crazy, but it was a fun moment for the clubhouse. And does it feel like the Phillies have had any of those fun moments over the past couple of seasons? To me, it doesn't. And I'm not saying they have to screw around in the clubhouse and do all this dumb stuff that has nothing to do with the game of baseball. But I am kind of saying that. You can't force it, right? It has to be an organic creation. But Brad Miller is a great example of a player that at face value is, with all due respect, a nobody when it comes to a championship caliber team's equation. You're not going to win a World Series because of World Series MVP Brad Miller. And I'm not trying to take a shot at the guy, but he's not Bryce Harper. He's not Kyle Schwarber. He's not Trey Turner. But sometimes having a player like that can get a locker room in the right mindset is a majorly underrated part of a team, especially in a sport like baseball, where you're playing so many games and you're together all the time. Could you imagine, like even your best friends, if you spent 180 straight days working with them, living with them, eating your meals with them, traveling with them, you'd get tired of each other too. And those are your best friends. These are just dudes that play the same sport. So there's going to be tension and there are going to be difficult times. And there are going to be times where the game weighs on you. And the Phillies over the past couple of years have looked like the game has weighed on them heavily. We heard stuff from Bryce Harper this year talking about how like the daycare celebrations don't need to be a thing anymore. We saw less of that, the seeds and the water after wins, which the Phillies used to do after every win and now only do after big wins. We saw Alec Boehm and the mental struggles he's gone through with, hey, I'm in a slump. I'm going to slam my equipment. I'm going to mope. Like that, it doesn't look like some of these guys are enjoying baseball. And while the pressure is high for the team and will continue to be as long as they're in this championship contention window, sometimes you need that role player or two to lighten the mood, to just bring in a bamboo plant, to do something silly that keeps the guys that feel like they have the weight of the world, or at least the weight of the city of Philadelphia on their backs, a little bit looser than what they would be elsewhere. So this is not so much a put Bamboo Brad Miller on the Phillies Wall of Fame conversation as it is what he represented in his time in Philadelphia feels like something the Phillies have not had enough of lately. Now, you can't just give up a roster spot to a vibes guy. Hey, if that was the case, I'll bring the 30 rack. I'll be on the Phillies tomorrow. You don't have to play me. We'll have a good time. I'll put together a playlist. I could be Garrett Stubbs Jr., but that's not the point. You do have to build the team with players that can play. And Brad Miller can play a little bit. But that's a part of the equation that it feels like the Phillies have lost. And when I saw that Miller retired, it just really brought me back to those days where it felt like it was a lot simpler. Now, I wonder, and this is just a theory that I've had, and you can tell me if you believe in this or not. I don't think that you can ever truly get back to that organically once you're where the Phillies are. Once you hit that point of anything short of a World Series is a failure, it's really hard to trick yourself into thinking, we're just going to play loose. This doesn't matter. We're just playing a game, having fun. Like, that is such a tough mental exercise to go through. So the Phils might be too far gone with this core, which is why at points this offseason, I've advocated for change's sake. Trade this guy just to get a different face in there. Maybe it changes up the vibe of the locker room. Move this player. Don't re-sign this player. Bring in a different guy. Like, the culture in the Philadelphia Phillies clubhouse, I don't think is bad, but it just feels tight to me. And maybe just making changes will alleviate some of that tightness, but it won't change the fan base's expectations as long as Harper and Turner and Schwarber are here and the payroll is top 5 in baseball and this fan base still wants to see this team win, right? They may be too far gone for the fun. We're not expected to do anything. Plucky team that brings in a bamboo plant. So maybe it doesn't work, and maybe that's on the superstars. And I don't know if you can hypnotize them into thinking something different or if there's a complete change in mentality that needs to happen. That's probably a better conversation for a sports psychologist. But I find it hard to believe, and I brought it up earlier this year, right? A team like the Toronto Blue Jays that had all these young guys playing, or some young guys playing, like a Atreus Savage, who's pitching in the majors for the first time, and it's in the postseason and then the World Series. Like, you can't create that for a player like Bryce Harper or a player like Kyle Schwarber or Trey Turner who have been there before, that we don't know any better attitudes, so we're not afraid of anything. So maybe the Phillies can't get to that place. And maybe that's part of the problem with this core, because they're so veteran and so hardened when it comes to the ways of Major League Baseball that they can't lighten up to the level that maybe other teams can and that they need to. But it was something that pointed to a piece of DNA for the Phillies that I don't think is discussed enough. And so one more thank you to Brad Miller for giving me that thought today when I saw the news about his retirement. A reminder of our schedule real quick before we wrap up today's episode. There will be an episode tomorrow on Thanksgiving. We're going to talk about a lot of things that we're thankful for with the Phillies, some things we're not so thankful for with the Phillies, but it'll be a fun episode. And we will have one Black Friday as well. So you won't miss any Phillies content. You need to get away from the family and just hear me talk some baseball. We'll do that for you tomorrow and Friday. So stay tuned for more episodes, but that's all for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now the #1 sports podcast network. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, and I'll talk to you tomorrow on Thanksgiving for our next episode.